I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Pearson College is a community located on the traditional unceded territory of the Sianu First Nation. A distinct and independent nation, the Sianu people are part of a larger Indigenous cultural group referred to as Coast Salish on Vancouver Island, with a broad area that encompasses southern Vancouver Island. We acknowledge the land upon which Pearson sits as unceded territory, which respects the fact the Sianu people never gave up, legally signed away, or ceded their lands to Canada or to Pearson College. Students, faculty, college leadership, and the entire campus community are committed to deepening our relationship with the Sianu today, today and well into the future. Personally, I'm grateful to be living on campus. Being by the ocean reminds me of my home back in the Maritimes, where I grew up on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Like Pearson students, I also had the privilege of the UWC experience attending the Mahindra United World College of India. This is my second year in the role of Alumni Engagement Manager at Pearson, and it's been a pleasure evolving within the UWC movement from a student into my current role, and I look forward to the journey ahead. Wonderful. So today we'll hear from our head of college, Jason McBride, who is also in his second year with Pearson. He'll update us on his vision for the college as we look ahead to the next 50 years. After Jason's update, you will meet my new colleague, followed by a presentation on Pearson College's Climate Action Plan, hosted by Johnny Mills, a Pearson alumnus, who is also the school sustainability coordinator. There will also be a chance to ask Johnny some questions about his Climate Action Plan after the presentation. So I would now like to welcome Jason McBride, who is sure to cause a ripple as he works to foster our mission to unite, inspire, and act. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks, Phoebe. Great to see a lot of familiar faces on the call. I see some new names as well, so it's great to have new people dialing in, existing parents as well as alumni from several generations ago. I think the basis of my conversation today in updating sort of the wider community is one of sort of pragmatic idealism. I think in my 14th year as a head of school, and I think that's the angle that I've always taken, and it felt particularly appropriate to frame today. So I'm going to start talking about a couple of the things that are focused on our sort of idealism, our mission, our impact, our reason for being here. And then at the end, switch to sort of pragmatism, which is answering a lot of the questions that came in ahead of time around the finances of the school, how are we doing sort of with the campus renewal and elements like that. So I think two big things that I want to talk about, one that Phoebe tongue-in-cheek alluded to about causing ripples. If you saw the e-news that just went out on Monday, the Ripple program is something that started this year as an explicit way to focus on anti-polarization skills. And what I mean by that is, you know, we used to believe that by virtue of bringing together a deliberately diverse group of people, that the proximity hypothesis would take hold and everybody would learn to get along well with one another. And what we saw last year was there was a disproportionate number of called students, where our called students were, when there was workshops that needed facilitating, they were stepping up. And it was no coincidence that with called students being taken through explicit facilitation workshops and having time to develop those skills, that they were best positioned in order to lead difficult conversations when things like that occurred. Of course, the called students are only about 10, 11% of our total student population. And so we hatched this program to develop Ripple. And it runs now as a series over the course of this year. It's been 7 90-minute workshops on things such as using curiosity to delay judgment, perspectivism. We've done open scenarios where we talk about where that scenario fits on the continuum of being okay, uncomfortable, hurtful, and harmful. And it's amazing to kind of open up that dialogue really explicitly in a space that students have practiced the skills of having difficult conversations so they can share their opinion and be in genuine dialogue rather than just trying to convince each other that we're right, which is how the world feels a lot of the time, both online and in real life. The practical impact of that has been incredible. And I get goosebumps when I think about what's happened this year, because over the past couple of weeks and months, you know, our students here have always wanted to and been able to present on, you know, conflict elements back at home. And we had, if you saw the e-news and clicked on the link, you saw Tala and Shams, their presentation on the conflict, the regime change in Syria. and the revolution that's happening there in real time right now. We've always had that. What we haven't always had in sort of campus-wide dialogues in a very positive and healthy way are conversations around things like the conflict in Gaza, the conflict in Ukraine, and being able to host movies and then have discussion around nuanced conversations that even adults struggle with around things like, does being pro something automatically make you anti something else? Or who has a responsibility for rebuilding after war? Or, you know, those kind of discussions that are rich, deep, and meaningful that haven't caused schisms, but have helped people understand, even if they don't agree. That's kind of what we're aiming for here with a peace, peace being a big part of our mission. All of the learning kind of came to a head last week when we were hosting the president and UWC alum from year 10, Deb Saucier. She's the president of Vancouver Island University, up island in Nanaimo. Well, VIU was recently in the news because on February 8th or 9th, something like that, there was a court injunction that had them remove the last pro-Palestinian encampment on a college campus in Canada. For our students who are, very aware of the politics around us and around the world, there was a number of students who came forward to talk about, should we cancel the talk because this is the move that VIU has made, and it comes back to the president who is ultimately the figurehead in that decision. And we decided to go ahead, and we decided to open up conversation for being able to ask tough, difficult, direct questions, even if you disagree with the answer, but being able to hold that space. Our students went one step further. They had a silent protest. For those who were interested, they brought Palestinian flags and sat in a group in the Max Bell, in the McConnell Theater, and sat together as a show of solidarity against the decision that VIU had made. And I actually sent an email out to the entire community after, saying that I've rarely been more proud of our community for expressing themselves in a way that is in line with their own beliefs, in a respectful way that was very visible, very difficult questions. And Deb, for her part, did an amazing job of explaining what she could explain. And it was, to me, a real hope that the Ripple program and everything we're doing to explicitly focus on peace building skills is actually having an impact. Doesn't mean that everybody agreed with what was said, and we're never going to get that, but being able to talk about difficult things the moment they come up has been the goal of Ripple, and it's really nice to sort of see that happen. So we look forward to continuing that program. What we're looking to do in second year is not only revise the first year content, but create opportunities for our students in second year to then lead workshops for people not only in our community on campus, but around us in Pearson, around the Pearson campus in the sort of local area, as well as virtually across Canada and further afield. So we're really sort of spreading our impact and trying to make our dent in the world by making the world a little bit more peaceful. So that's Ripple. The other big thing that I want to share that really is rooted in our idealism is all of the work we're doing around reconciliation. Nobody is going to say, there's never going to be a finish point for peace or reconciliation efforts. But one of the things we were able to do at the beginning of this year was host, and really this is the outgrowth of the deep relationships that the CALD students and staff, faculty, and program have formed with elders, both with Chiana, but also, Sartlip, Songhees, Esquimalt. There's a number of nations around us who we form really deep relationships with. And we were able to do a land welcoming ceremony, which we mistakenly labeled as being the first time. And we kind of got caught up in our own language. It wasn't the first time we'd ever done one like this, because there was a non-documented first landing back in 1995. This was the first time that we were landing on Maryhill lands, which was significant because the federal government is working with Chiana to return the Maryhill lands, which are the lands that wrap around the Pearson College campus. So we were working, I was very proud to be invited there, to be there with Chief Chips, who is the chief at Chiana, and be able to welcome our paddlers coming into that Maryhill land. Because for Chiana, it was the first time that many of the community had ever even been on that land, because it hasn't been there since it was taken by the government many, many years ago. So it's one of those ways that we are trying to do our best to be active peace building stewards of the land and water and relationships that are around us. Since long before we were uninvited guests, it was nice to be an invited guest to land in that ceremony and start to reverse a little bit of the the damage done by virtue of us being settlers and on unceded and traditional territory of the Chiano. So those are two pieces of idealism. I thought those were sort of good news stories to share. Far from perfect in any regard, but moving in the right direction. Our mission should be more appropriately a vision, because the world will never be peaceful or sustainable, but we aim for both of those things, because to do otherwise would be to step away from our mission after 50 years, and we're just not ready to do that. One thing that I want to talk about that transitions from idealism and pragmatism is something that we launched this year. The school has run different versions of this over the last couple of years, but Arno Dirks, who is the deputy head of academics, launched and working with the faculty, launched teaching and learning surveys with all students back in December. So we had all students for all faculty in all classes go through a survey of about 20 questions to talk about how the students were feeling about how they're supported, challenged, resourced, cared for in those classes. And really, really happy to see. You always kind of hold your breath waiting for the results to come in, because you have your gut feel, you have your, your direct observation from watching classes yourself, being in classes. But we're really happy to see almost 90% of the respondents from all students came back as being agreeing or strongly agreeing with the 20 questions. And so, 10% off, we'd love that to be at 100%, but 89.5% of students saying they agree or strongly agree with all those elements of teaching and learning gave us a really good jumping off point, not only to celebrate the sort of quality of instruction, but also to shape our meeting topics with faculty for the rest of the year, for individual goal setting with our teachers, as well as looking at professional development in the months and years ahead. So I just wanted to share that, because it was something we were doing to give students voice. They were done with names on them, but only Arno and I saw the names. We stripped the student name off before providing the data to the teachers. So it gave the students a chance to be honest, but also accountable to their conversation or to the data that they were sharing and the feedback that they were sharing. So really happy to see that. Most of the questions that came in ahead of time switch over to the pragmatic side. Lots of questions around our finances, unionization, campus renewal, and things like that. So I'm going to tackle some of those, and hopefully I have, if you saw my desk right now, I have Post-it notes for many, many topics. So I'm glad you can only see me and not the disaster that is my desk. But I'll go through a couple of different areas, and hopefully I capture the vast majority of the questions that came in. The union negotiation with faculty, we concluded it was a 19-month process from the time of certification back in June 2023. It was a month before I started where they certified, and we just signed off the ratified collective agreement on January 31st. A long process, lots of give and take on both sides. But we now have a 3-year agreement that takes us through for the next 2 academic years before we have to start sort of renegotiating the next contract, which is what happens in Canada and in BC, which is a very union-rich environment. For those of you who don't work in union-rich environments, you might wonder, what this is all about. It's very common in BC and in Canada for unions to form, especially for teacher unions. They're a highly unionized group across the country. But we're really happy to have concluded that process and be able to just move forward instead of it being there. It's something that's hanging there for the faculty and for the leadership and board. So we're pretty happy with where it came out. Both sides are probably a little bit disappointed, which is that's how we know that we landed somewhere in the middle. We just look forward to now sort of implementing it and carrying things forward. Campus renewal is actually related to sort of union negotiation. There were questions around cost structures and what we spend on what. The UWC movement did a really good piece of work over the last couple of years to look at all UWCs and give us an apples to apples comparison to one another. Pearson right now spends 59% of our revenue on faculty and staff salary, benefits, and all things related to staffing, which puts us 1% over the UWC norm. So the UWC norm was 58%, we're at 59%, so we're spot on sort of what the average spend is across the group. The cost of our tuition is higher than many of the other ones that are in lower cost living areas. As you would expect, Singapore and Hong Kong, Changshu are higher than ours. But we're not a low cost of living when we compare ourselves to Mostar or Muki or other countries that are in more affordable areas. So it's good to know that our metrics are sort of spot on around what we're paying for salary and benefits versus educational programming, things like that. So we're right on that average. Campus renewal. We have a number of projects that are underway right now, and a number that are sort of in the planning and sort of forward-looking stages. The e-grid, the electrical grid replacement, in 2022, there was an 11-day power outage on campus in the winter, and that the school had been looking at an electrical grid replacement because most of the wiring in the ground is none of it's in conduits. The transformers were more than 40 years old. The wiring is all buried directly into the ground. So you can imagine that it looks like spaghetti when we opened up the ground and looked at tree roots and wires all mashed in together. So we started a $5.5–6 million project to bury conduit, re-pull all the wires, and replace all 4 transformers. Most of all of the trenching has been done. We're starting to pull wires, and the transformers will be replaced in the summer, I believe June, July, August. We're working around the reunions. I'll talk about those in a second, but we'll be replacing those so that we have an updated infrastructure in that regards. Wastewater treatment plant, there's a number of sort of infrastructure pieces on campus that are 50 years old and in need of replacement, and we're deep into those replacements now. The Social Innovation Lab is a project that began a couple of years ago. We've now collected all of the money for it, and we're ready to put a shovel in the ground to do the renovation of what is called the LLT or the ATM. Some people call it the alphabet room because it's had so many iterations of letters behind its name. But it's a space it's an older space. It's a small amphitheater room, and we're looking to tear it apart and modernize it in order to give us a space to run things like our Ripple program with really good teleconferencing equipment to connect our students here in an isolated location with the outside world. So we're ready to do the demolition in sort of late May, early June, and then carry forward with construction there into the first part of next year. And then the pool, and the pool is in a situation right now where the pool is out of commission right now. The infrastructure for it, the pipes, the filters have been renewed over the years, but the pipes, the deck, and the base of the pool are all 48, 49 years old. And as we're seeing across not only BC but across Canada, many public schools that are in that age of sort of post-war construction, into post-war construction, or for us 1975, 1976, a lot of the pools are closing due to the cost of refurbishment. For us, right now the estimate is $2.25 to $2.5 million in order to refurbish the pool. So we're busy looking and working with an architect and design team on what it would cost to do a pool renewal versus using that space as just as a thought as turning it into a multi-use gym space, which can be used all day, every day for many different reasons, especially through the rainy months, to get everybody indoors and off the tennis courts, because it does rain here a lot on the west and wet coast. So the pool is right now in that design phase. We are doing some of that work in March, April, May, so that we have a plan ready for the fall in terms of what we're going to do, in terms of raising money, figuring out how to pay for whatever it is that we run. So if you want to keep an eye on that and you're interested in helping us to refurbish that space, then watch this space closely. In terms of finances and endowment, every Global Village gathering or village gathering that I've been to with alumni, people are always curious about our finances. And so I can share, we zero base budget every year. And when you do that, you're on a knife edge when something tips 5% in any direction. Last year, we ran a deficit of $285,000 because of the impact of inflation on food costs. Food costs last year were 23% higher than predicted during the budgeting process the year prior. Other impacts last year were sort of emergency maintenance projects where wastewater treatment plant had to be repaired right away. And so there was a couple of things that ran over in maintenance, but food costs were the big ones that got us last year. This year, we budgeted for a $15,000 surplus. And again, insurance was the surprise this year. Insurance costs are going up everywhere around the world. Insurance and medical costs continue to rise, and it impacts all of our families, but it impacts us as an organization as well. So a zero-based budget quickly turns into a deficit that we have to close the gap on by scrimping and saving wherever we can. Sometimes that's deferred maintenance. But as one of the questions came in about what the costs of maintenance have been over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, maintenance costs have almost doubled since 2019. A lot of that was because we were underspending on aging infrastructure, and you can only do that so long before the sort of bill comes due. And so I think 2019, off the top of my head, I think we spent somewhere in the mid 800,000s on maintenance for the campus, and that's risen to 1.8 million, 1.7 million in the current fiscal year. So it's an expensive campus to maintain. Instead of one giant building with one envelope, we have almost 30 buildings with their own envelopes and roofs and foundations, and it's a lot to maintain. But Ty and the operations team have done a great job of catching up with deferred maintenance that had been deferred for way too long. But it continues to be a challenge here as nature tries to reclaim our buildings, and we do our best to prevent that from happening. Questions around the endowment were plentiful. Our endowment, so I'll give you a couple of numbers. Our endowment in 2013, 2014 was valued at around $41 million. And today sits currently just around the $52 million point. Going back to about 5 or 6 years, in 2019, the investment committee, which is a subset of the board, came up with a new investment policy because the school had been withdrawing at a high of almost 7% from the endowment, which is not okay because between the 7% withdrawal and inflationary pressures, the endowment is actually shrinking over time. And so the investment committee ring-fenced the withdrawal at 4% plus $250K a year for capital projects, which has allowed not only the endowment to grow, we've benefited from a crazy bear market as well over the last bunch of years as well, but also treating the endowment like it needs to be treated, which is to be there in perpetuity and not just to close short-term deficits. That led to the school changing its approach, 6, 7, 8 years ago when they started charging tuition, moving away from the 100% model. But we continue to sit now at the model of 50, 25, and 25, 50% full scholarships, 25% partials, and 25% unfunded. And we're not looking to move away from that. Over time, we can grow the endowment, we can grow annual fundraising. We'd love to move back towards a more fulsome scholarship model, but that's where the idealism and the pragmatism run into one another. And we're trying to figure out how to do that. So if anybody has some great ideas about how to triple the size of our endowment to return to a more fulsome scholarship model closer to 100%, then we are all ears and open to your feedback. Let me just see what we're at. Check all my notes here for a second on finances. Campus renewal we talked about. There was a specific question about utility costs, which was interesting. I mean, that's when we're really getting into the weeds. Our utility costs over the last 4 or 5 years were relatively flat. This year, they're actually down because the pool is not being heated. The pool is actually right now our sort of quote unquote dirtiest building. It's heated by natural gas while everything else is electric. And in BC, most of our electric comes from hydro sources. So it's a fairly clean energy. It's not perfect, but it's fairly clean. But the pool right now, so over the last 4 or 5 years, our maximum spend on utilities was right around 200,000. This year, we're projecting at 160. So it's a significant savings of 20% not running the pool right now, even though we're a little bit heartbroken by the fact that the pool isn't open. We've offset that by running buses to a number of recreation centers around us so students can get out, swim links, get to the gym, go use the pool, use the hot tub and the various amenities there. So we're able to offset the pool use, but we do miss having it right in our own backyard. Staying on the endowment topic, there was questions about the returns of the endowment over years. Right now in our financial reports annually, we only report the last 2 years, and I'm happy to take it to the board and the investment committee to see if we can put a longer run on the endowment return so that folks know what the growth has been like and what the ring fencing has been like and what the sort of return has been like. Proteus is our manager. That when they present to the investment committee, we do take a look at 10-year. We take a look at 10-year returns. It's the investment committee is made up of financial members of the board, but as well as external sort of investing experts. So it's very well taken care of. But we can do a little bit more. I think taking it to the board to see if we can put sort of 5 or 10-year returns on there for a little bit more of a transparent window into how the endowment is doing. Okay, so the next one that Phoebe on Phoebe's laundry list of things for me to tackle is talking a little bit about the 50th celebration. So we get to move a little bit more out of the pragmatism and back into the sort of unite, inspire, and act element of this year. The main focus for our 50th year really has been to celebrate. You know, we had the close of the Renew and Refound campaign that ran for the better part of 6 years. And it just coincided with last December, us closing out that campaign and moving into this 50th, where we're really focused on reunions. I think we ended up having, we'll end up having 5.5 reunions if you count the one that was down in South America most recently. 5.5 reunions over a 13-month period. So our AER department, our alumni relations team, Phoebe especially, has been really, really busy holding the space for those events. Lori Sterling, our board chair, has asked me to put in a specific plug for anybody who's not signed up for their 50th or their 20th or 30th to please do sign up, because we're looking to get the maximum number of people back for that. The team here has been busy helping us celebrate in a variety of different ways. We had our 50th celebration in Victoria back in September, where Bob Ray was our keynote speaker, who came in and talked about Canada's position in the world and why Pearson and why the UWC movement needs to continue to exist. A little bit of foreshadowing for the situation that we find ourselves now with our southern neighbors talking about Canada perhaps becoming the 51st, but that's another conversation altogether over something maybe stronger than coffee. But we also have a bunch of events between now and July as well. So as I mentioned, we have the 3 reunions coming up this summer. We have a London event for those of you who are in Europe in April. So we're happy to be welcoming everybody to Canada House there. We're hosting that. We are open to helping to support other groups with a reunion in a box sort of approach. Phoebe and the team have put together a do-it-yourself sort of package, and we'd love to see reunions being held all over the world. So let us know how we can help you make that happen. I think that is most of what I had submitted beforehand. Phoebe, is there anything else I haven't touched on that you would love me to touch on, or questions? I don't know if the chat is open for questions or not, but is there anything else that you want me to touch on?
Those were some great updates, Jason. Thank you. I think you covered everything.
Okay, fantastic. I'll turn it over where that's kind of taking a look at where we're at and a little bit looking ahead. And I'm really excited for Johnny to put the draft plan in front of you, because just as we've done with Ripple, drawing on the impact of CALD and the students doing the facilitation, CALD is also spurring us on to think about how sustainability needs to be more explicitly interwoven within the program. And one of the first things we needed to do was get a really good look at where we stand today with our carbon footprint. And that would be much of what Johnny's about to talk about, but I really like to hold him up for the work he's done. I'll turn it back over to Phoebe so I don't steal too much of her thunder. And thanks again, everybody, for dialing in and for spending some time with us this morning.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jason, for those wonderful updates. And thank you as well to everybody who submitted questions in advance. We got many great ones, some of them. Yeah, I hope that also we'll be able to tackle as we move through the session. So before we turn it over to Johnny, I'm going to invite my colleague Warren Warlow to introduce themselves to you all. Welcome, Rowan.
Thanks, Phoebe. I know it's a tongue twister. My name is Rowan Warlow, and I'm the new Annual Giving and Stewardship Manager at Pearson College. You may have already gotten a phone call from me or seen my name in some recent email communications. In my role, I have the privilege of working with our incredible alumni, our parents, students, and friends of the college to strengthen our community and ensure that future students have the same transformative experience that so many of you have had. This year, as we celebrate Pearson's 50th anniversary, I'm especially excited about the ways we can come together, whether through storytelling, reconnecting, or giving back, to honor our shared history and to shape the next 50 years. I look forward to hearing from you all and excited to be part of this conversation today. Thanks for listening, and sending it back over to you, Phoebe.
Thank you, Rowan. Ruba El-Farjani has also joined our team as the new Alumni and Community Engagement Coordinator. Unfortunately, Ruba is under the weather at the moment and her voice is not quite up to par. So I will be just sharing a brief introduction on behalf of Ruba. You may have seen her face or her name in your inbox, as Ruba and I are working together on the planning and programming for everything related to alumni engagement. Ruba is primarily focusing on reunion registrations and handling alumni inquiries. And Ruba grew up on Vancouver Island as an uninvited settler on the Lekwungen territory. She has a strong interest in global health and equity and hopes to learn more from the alumni and the wider Pearson community about the global communities that they are part of. So if you would like to meet Ruba in person when she's feeling better, hopefully soon, I invite you to attend a Q&A session she's hosting next week about alumni volunteering and upcoming reunions. So if you keep an eye on our social media as well as your inbox, there'll be more information about that coming your way soon. So as many of you likely know, at Pearson, we are lucky to live in a truly beautiful environment and have many opportunities to connect to the lands and waters around us. So it fosters, I think alumni are especially familiar with the feeling of a desire to protect not just this ecosystem, but the global environment that we're all part of as well. Johnny Mills is a Pearson alum with a tremendous desire to tackle the tall task of sustainability on campus. He will join us now to share the climate action plan he's developed and his vision for the future. As Johnny presents, please feel free to write questions that you may have for Johnny about the climate action plan in the chat, as we'll have the opportunity for some Q&A at the end of Johnny's presentation. You'll also be invited to share a question by raising your hand through the Zoom function if you would like, but if you want to write that question down and get it in the chat, please feel free to do so as we hear from Johnny. So welcome, Johnny.
Thanks so much, Phoebe. And thanks everyone for joining us. Really excited to be here and be part of this. Yeah, I was a student here just about 10 years ago. And I think something that's really special to see is connecting for myself with, the memories, the things that don't change about Pearson, but also recognizing the places where we can move forward. We can think about how do we develop over time. The past 50 years, sustainability has been core to what we do at Pearson and to all of our experiences. And in the next 50 years, how do we really solidify that? How do we put that into kind of a core vision for the college, put it, into the things that guide our actions and guide the leadership of the team and all of those different things. And really drawing inspiration, as Jason said, from the CALD program, doing a lot of that incredible work on the pedagogical side of things with our teaching, thinking about how do we also cement that into our operations. And that's a lot of what I'm going to look at today when I'm sharing the climate action plan. And so this is really kind of coming out of the work of developing the Strategy 2027 plan, which kind of was really thinking about how do we put all these things together. And that phrase of kind of walking the walk, of saying this is a core part of our mission at the college, is really thinking about this idea of education as a force for a sustainable future. And if that is absolutely essential to what we're doing, it's also how do we kind of bring that into, the essentials of work that takes place in terms of what do our buildings look like? How do people get to the college? What do they eat? All of these things that are kind of the nuts and bolts of making education this force, and thinking as well about the idea of education is what people are learning, but it's also how people learn to live together. And can we provide really a model community for being sustainable, and a model community where people develop those skills of what does it look like to live in a sustainable way? And so I really like to start all of my presentations with this kind of trying to bring it back to this level of what does sustainability even mean? This is really this term that's thrown around so much, that is brought up in so many different, reports. And there's really, I think, an issue of thinking about how do we define this term in a way that's really useful and brings us back. And so there are two key ideas that I think about when I think about sustainability. And a lot of this draws from UWC Costa Rica, put together a great sustainability framework. And so the first one is this idea of balance, is if something is going to exist for a long time, if a system or an institution or a school is going to be sustainable, you need to have this balance between give and take. You need to have a balance between what we're putting back in, what we're taking out. And so this can be balance in terms of, resource usage, not just endlessly depleting things without giving back. But, sustainability more broadly can also refer to social elements of, do we have a community where people put in work, students put in work, but they're also recognized and feel validated? And do we have, financially a situation where when we're drawing funds out, we're looking at ways to replenish those funds. We're looking at funding projects over the entire lifespan to make sure that they happen. And this idea of living in balance really takes us to this next idea of reciprocity. If we live in balance, that's a place where there is that conscious give and take. There's that conscious thinking about the connections that we have between us. And reciprocity isn't always direct. Reciprocity can be something like, we live on this land and we, drink the water, and we are grateful for that. And we think about, okay, how do we care for other watersheds in our area? And so reciprocity is really that sense of living in right relation. And all of these things connect to what Phoebe was talking about with thinking about our role as, settlers on this land, thinking about the institution of Pearson College being on this land. What does it mean for us specifically to live in right relation with our, Shianu Nation, but also with kind of the broader environment, other indigenous groups, all of these places in this area. And so this is kind of my broad way that I understand sustainability. And more narrowly, the way that I'm thinking about it a lot in the climate action plan is thinking about that sense of balance in emissions. And so how do we think about kind of drawing down and reducing the ways that we are creating greenhouse gas emissions so that we can move closer to that place of balance and not be contributing to the overall global issue we have of that lack of balance in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And so Pearson's commitment to sustainability, as I said, has existed for a very long time. And the most recent context is really thinking about the Strategy 2027 plan that called for this climate action plan, this more specific document, to provide what they called an operational roadmap. And I really like that term because that says, that's describing where are we trying to get to and how are we going to get there, of those really two key pieces. And this is, the Climate Action Plan, or the CAP, is building on existing work at the college, ideas from the Strategy 27 plan, ideas as well for, folks who are here maybe 10, 15 years ago with the Oikos Sustainability Charter. Was an initiative that was in kind of the mid-2000s. And obviously there have been many, many legacies of kind of different sustainability plans and visions over time for Pearson College. And I think what the CAP is trying to do that's really building on that is these two key pieces. And so one is to really establish the college's official greenhouse gas emissions baseline. And that really comes from the sense of, before we can reduce emissions, we need to know where are we at right now. And that helps us target our actions in the places that really matter. And it also helps us to measure, okay, when we say we're going to implement this target, can we actually see that we are making progress against that? And so that's been a lot of work over the course of this year with data collection of different departments, working to understand how much fuel are we using for the boats, how much, what is the kind of food that we're buying in the dining hall, all of these different pieces. And working with Climate Smart, which is associated with the Bank of Montreal, to secure software and professional guidance to really streamline that process of gathering all that data, putting it all into one place, and creating a way to move forwards from that. And then the second piece of the CAP is, okay, great. Once we have this official baseline, what are our then targets for emissions reduction, and what are the actions necessary to meet them? And so that's been, meetings with staff, faculty, students, to really think about what's the comprehensive plan across college operations to work on that. And so this is generated thinking about our 23-24 baseline. So the baseline for the previous fiscal year, because that's what we have full data for. And so unsurprisingly, we know that Pearson College, being an international school, bringing people from around the world, air travel is the largest component, and also a tricky component to deal with, because we don't want to stop having students from around the world. We don't want to stop bringing people together. But that's making up, roughly about 60% or so of the overall emissions. That's factoring in travel to and from the school at the start and the end of the year, as well as over the winter break. Another big piece, food. Obviously, if you're feeding 210 students plus, another 60 or so employees, that's really going to be a large chunk there. And that's also a place where we have a little bit more control over how do we think about targeting emissions reductions within that. And thinking about what's the ways that we get to that place of still having, good and nutritious food for everyone, but it's also nutritious for the planet. Natural gas being about 7% or so. Jason alluded to the pool as a key piece there. But, that's really the remaining natural gas infrastructure that we have on campus in terms of air and water heating in a couple of the different buildings, as well as some natural gas equipment remaining in, the dining hall and the pool. And then there's kind of the grab all category, which is the rest. And so that's things like fuel for campus vehicles, the waste that we're producing as a college, whether that's from renovation projects or from just kind of the general day-to-day living, commuting for employees, the electricity that we're purchasing from BC Hydro and the emissions associated with that. And so this is kind of the overall vision that we have of what emissions look like from operations. It doesn't include, everything. There are a couple places that we're still looking to build in further data for things like, footprinting our reunions, for things like footprinting, business travel. But this is a pretty good vision of kind of the key areas. And so that, benchmark number of just short of 2,200 tons of CO2 equivalents, that breaks down to, roughly 10 tons or so per student at the college, which is, comparable, a little bit higher than household emissions generally in BC. And so that's really a place for us to think about how do we move forward and kind of reclaim the space of being a leader in terms of sustainability. And so that's really the vision through the climate action plan. And so there's kind of a couple different key pieces in here that I've highlighted that touch on those really big areas. But obviously this plan really stretches across campus operations. And so in terms of the big pieces of the climate action plan, a really large one is thinking about the winter break, because students need to get here at the start of the year. They need to go home, at the end of the year or somewhere else at the end of the year. But the winter break is really a place where we have a bit of an option to think about what are the alternatives potentially to students returning home. And so that's things like expanding our host family program to make sure that all of the students who want have a place to stay in Victoria, and thinking about what are the forms of outreach, improved training that we can provide to really strengthen that program. That's things like working with the existing initiatives within the Canadian National Committee of looking at students going home with other Canadian students from Pearson or other UWCs, and thinking about that as well as a place for potentially students getting to see other parts of Canada, but also having then, a shorter flight, potentially only 1 or 2 provinces over, rather than looking at transoceanic flights that are going to have those higher emissions. And then there's also kind of bigger ideas around, would we think about some kind of in-house winter break program, potentially something for students as an alternative to returning home that would again be, looking at providing an enriched experience that kind of goes beyond what we can generally offer throughout the course of the school year by having a little bit of extra time and building that piece out. Turning to food, again, it's thinking about revising meals in the dining hall to ensure food is not just nutritious, but also healthy for the planet. And so thinking about that's kind of rejigging what is the balance of different meats that we're serving in the cafeteria and where are we sourcing those things from. That's things like, can we work with our food contractors to build out their program for training chefs on plant-based food and plant-based cooking to ensure that those are really desirable and things that people are really excited to eat, and building those things out. And really, small efforts as well, thinking about, okay, reducing food waste. What are different ideas that we can use to reduce the amount of food that has to be grown for us, but then is ultimately wasted and is ultimately not used. And thinking as well about things like, continued renovations. Jason mentioned the BMO Social Innovation Lab. Part of that would be there's one natural gas furnace still left in the academic building. And so thinking about replacing that with a heat pump to cut down on those emissions, thinking about within the dining hall, can we take advantage of the great, steps we're seeing in terms of commercial cooking equipment that's going to, really provide those same services, but with far, far fewer emissions. And so those are kind of a couple of big pieces, but there's obviously lots more, and I'm happy to delve into that in the Q&A if people have specific questions. And so really thinking about what's next, thinking about reviewing this draft climate action plan as a community. And so, sharing it with all of the people on campus who are involved in this, and thinking about building that out. And then the next step really is to, once we kind of have a sense of what are our targets, what are the actions, think about, let's make sure we're costing all of these things. Let's make sure that we have a plan for what's the funding. And so is that a sense of, we have a project that we're looking to fundraise for that's really going to take us over that hurdle, or reallocating the ways that we're already spending money to make sure that it's as, environmentally friendly as possible. And that's really essential to thinking about, how do we ensure that this plan goes forwards, and how do we ensure that this plan, it turns into the climate action of the action plan. And then obviously finalizing board approval for the climate action plan at the end of this year, and making sure that we have this as a roadmap that we can use for the college going forwards to really walk that walk of sustainability. And I think that it's really important, something I say to my students all the time, something I say to colleagues all the time, is the purpose of this plan is really something that we can all, guide our actions towards, and also hold ourselves accountable to. And so that also extends to our external community of putting this plan out as a way for us to say, this is what we value, this is what we're going to do, and this is what we are willing to be held accountable to in terms of what we want to achieve. And so thanks everyone very much. Yeah, happy to take some questions on the climate action plan.
Thanks, Johnny. So if anyone wants to raise their hand through the Zoom function, you can click on the React button on the bottom toolbar and click on raise hand, or you're welcome to drop them in the chat. Yes, Yanis, go ahead.
Hey, just a comment. First, thank you so much for this. It's awesome. Thank you for all the work that's gone into it, and definitely having the vision or starting point or a point in the middle for us to look at. So thank you for that. Just a quick question. Being in Ontario and having snow and cold and rain and all that, it appears that from the table, the building heating and cooling and all that constitutes a really small part of the total cost, which is just a comment from my side. It seems interesting how, when we think about saving costs and for long-term sustainability, it usually comes down to how do we make our buildings much more efficient and how they work and triple glazing and all that stuff and insulation and all that. But from what the baseline seems to indicate from 23 and 24 is that actually, but like you said, the air travel is probably, by far the largest impact on has largest impact on what we're doing, and commuting is like 1% or something, which again in my mind would be like much larger for everything. So just a comment from my side. It's interesting to see the data, but thank you so much for putting it all together.
Yeah, and I think something that to build off of that, which is also important in terms of thinking about sustainability, is thinking about, I think a really big reason that the numbers are that low is because there's already been a lot of work for electrification so far in terms of putting in heat pumps and things in all of the student houses as part of the renovation processes. And so that's been a lot of achieving those really low numbers. But also kind of tying back to something that Jason was talking about around utility costs, is that the electricity is relatively low emissions, but quite expensive. And so in terms of that, $160,000 or so for utility costs, about $120,000 of that is electricity. And then natural gas makes up about the remaining, 40, 50,000 or so. And so I think part of sustainability is also thinking about, obviously within this plan, the emissions reductions, but also thinking about how are we looking at electricity saving, not just for emissions savings, but also for cost savings as well. And thinking about using these resources really wisely, because we also know that in BC, as we move forwards in the years, there's going to be larger and larger demands upon the electrical grid of BC as a whole. And so reducing the amount of electricity that the college is using, I think, is really key in terms of not just the environmental sustainability, but also the fiscal sustainability and the being good neighbors and kind of being conscious of our place in the province as a whole, of kind of drawing down those numbers, definitely.
Thank you so much, Johnny. Do we have any other questions for Johnny? Of course, also you'll receive a follow-up email with some contact information for myself and my colleagues if you'd like to reflect a little bit as well. I know it's been a lot of information. But if everyone is feeling satiated with sustainability information to sort of mull over, thank you so much, Johnny, for that wonderful presentation, and Yanis for the great question and sharing the reflections. So yes. Okay, great. I'll move on then. So thank you, everyone. Oh, we have a question in the chat actually from Elizabeth. Are students involved? So yeah, maybe Johnny, you could tell us about student involvement in the climate action plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And so students are definitely involved, and that involvement takes a couple different forms. And so the way that kind of students are most directly involved with the plan itself is we have a sustainability committee at the college. And so that's bringing together, obviously myself, but also some of the kind of key adults within the community. And so Emily, the director of the Climate Action Leadership Diploma, Ty, the VP of operations, and all of those different things. And so, but also then student representatives. And so that's student representatives from the college assembly, the kind of structure that we have of bringing students and connecting students with leadership processes, but also just a couple kind of students who expressed some really strong interest at the start of the year and who have been carrying that work forwards in other ways. And so that's really an advisory body on the climate action plan. And so before I'm sharing this plan with you, we had a meeting where we sat down and I kind of went line through line by the plan with the students and said, what feels achievable to you, as a student? What feels realistic based on the student body of Pearson College? Could we do this in 2 years? Could we do this in 5 years? What would you want to see? How could this plan, be about making your lives better and more rich, rather than this idea of kind of sustainability is stringent or sustainability is kind of cutting back on the things you enjoy? And so the sustainability committee is one place, but obviously, there's many, many ways that students are involved more broadly with sustainability at the college. And so whether that's pedagogically through the Climate Action Leadership Program, through the CAS stream. And so I have a group that looks at kind of sustainability on campus more broadly, but there's also groups looking at sustainability more specifically in terms of our forests and caring for the forested environment around Pearson. There's, students thinking about fashion and taking used textiles and repurposing those, and sustainability in kind of those more grounded specific ways. But yeah, definitely a couple kind of key places that students, involve.
Thank you, Johnny. Okay, we have a few more questions coming in the chat. If that's okay with you, I'll pass them over. So first from Benjamin, we have, what are the plans for continuity as students and adults move on from Pearson? And I would assume maybe that is in relation to sustainability as well.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think the continuity piece is essential, because if we go back to this idea of sustainability, nothing is sustainable if it dies over a 2-year time horizon because it's connected to one individual or it's someone's personal project. And so I think that the climate action plan itself is really a key piece towards sustainability, because then that's providing a roadmap of saying, this is the things that we're working on, these are the projects we're working on, these are the targets that we're moving towards, and making sure that, if I, leave this role, if there are individual student champions who are no longer here, that they have that document to refer back to and say, this is where we're at, this is where we're moving towards. And also a piece of continuity is continuing, we have our baseline for last year, but then the key piece is going to be, say, great, let's update it for this fiscal year, let's update it for the next fiscal year. And having that continued tracking process moving over time is a really key piece. And kind of in terms of the nuts and bolts of sustainability committee, obviously that's making sure we have both first and second years. And so thinking about people develop that familiarity in the first year, they get a sense of what's going on. And then in so many other facets of Pearson life, we're always, relying on those second years to carry things over and to help, continue building that process. And so thinking about that, making sure that we have student leaders, obviously within both the first and second years as well, as a place to carry that forwards.
Thank you. And Sujit is wondering about cooperation with other UWCs.
Definitely, yeah. I got off a call actually just the hour before this, where we were talking with the UWCs and the UWCIO in terms of thinking about how do we start to think about standardizing some of the benchmarks that we're using across different schools. And that's obviously recognizing local context, that thinking about that schools exist in really different situations. Some people don't even own their buildings. Some people are renting their buildings. That kind of ties their hands with what they can do. But really starting to think about, how do we standardize across the movement the ways that we're tracking our emissions? And so that's things like making sure that we have a standard methodology for, something like flights that involves, a lot of the different schools have those. Are we tracking that all in the same way? Are we using the same kinds of numbers to make sure that we're standardizing that? And so definitely a lot of thinking about how do we, work with the other UWCs to be tracking these things in similar ways, and also just getting inspiration. And so, I had a great call with one of the UWC sustainability coordinators in Mostar, and they talked about one of their initiatives around, they really loved the idea of having an opt-in vegetarian week where students can choose to eat vegetarian for a week. And I said, wow, that sounds fantastic. And so we're bringing that idea and thinking about what would that look like in the context of Pearson, having conversations with our dining hall staff around how could we facilitate that. And so really the idea of, best practices sharing between the other UWCs definitely is something that's happening and is really key.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Johnny, for taking the time to answer questions, and to our alumni, parents, and supporters for sharing your questions and for being here with us today. And thank you, Jason, for providing updates on the college. So I see another question in the chat about sharing slides. And so we'll definitely receive a follow-up email, and I'll have to ask Johnny maybe off a Zoom call about sharing the slides, but I'm sure that we'll be able to share information about the climate action plan in a follow-up to this call. So we look forward to keeping you all updated on news at the college and sharing more student stories and details about the 50th anniversary activities that we have coming up, our reunions this summer, the climate action plan, and of course, all the other many wonderful things happening at this busy place. And should you have any questions for the alumni department, I encourage you to reach out to me at alumni@pearsoncollege.ca. But again, you'll receive a follow-up email after this with some contact information as well for any of the questions that maybe come to you as soon as you get off the Zoom call, and hopefully you'll be able to share some more information there as well, because we got to hear a lot today, so it was great. So thank you again for coming, and I hope that you have a great week. Bye, everyone.